Making sure, let me just make sure that it's showing up live. Okay. It looks like the sound is working. So if you join live, you can just say hello, um, introduce yourself, where you're coming from. You can post your questions in the comments. I hope I see them. If I see them afterwards, then I'll answer your questions afterwards. And I'm apologizing ahead of time if I don't see like your comments or anything, because sometimes I see them and sometimes I don't. Okay, so have you ever thought, um, you know, when it comes, about creating a website for your business, and then, you either you think about it, or then the moment you start looking into it, and then, and then suddenly you just, you feel overwhelmed, right? Maybe you start thinking about, you know, what pages that you need. You start thinking about, the your homepage should say that's gonna, attract your ideal clients. What platform to use, whether you need funnels too, and before you know it, it's like a spiral, right? And it starts to feel like a lot. And so let me know if that is something that you've experienced before. You're definitely not alone. This is something that I hear a lot, that I hear from, especially from coaches and service-based business owners, that you know that they really want to get their website done, but when it comes to trying to do it, it gets overwhelming, right? And you're thinking about everything all at once. And so it's usually because of a few very specific things, like, the process and all those things all together that actually needs to be done. So today we're going to talk about three reasons why, your website often, it can get overwhelming, and what actually matters instead. So the first thing is, um, too many decisions all at once, like I kind of mentioned before. And so that's one of the biggest, reasons that it feels overwhelming. And so it becomes like this really big decision, right? There's a lot. Like I mentioned those things before. Should I use WordPress? Should I use Squarespace or something else? What colors? How many colors? What colors I should use? Do I need a funnel? What plugins I need to use? What about backup? What if my website crashes? How do I make sure? What do I need to put on my homepage? Like, what words do I need to use? And so it just becomes, and start trying to figure all those things out at once. But here's the truth. Um, most of these decisions actually come, later in the process. And so the first thing, what we really should think about when it becomes a lot and all that matters, is the clarity. And so clarity around, who you help, what problem you solve, and how someone works with you. And so that's those first things that you think about before even thinking about those other things. That's that we need to figure out the clarity. And so once those things are clear, many of the other decisions become much easier to make. And so that's that first step, first thing to remember. And then the next thing is, trying to build the website before the message is clear. And so this is another a reason many people start before they even know what the message is they're trying to figure out. And so, and why that's important is because your message, it's that foundation. It's the main thing. Your website should clearly answer three things for visitors. Who is this for? What problem does this person solve? And how can I work with them? And so when those things are clear, your message, that's what you should be answering. Those things are clear, your website becomes much easier to plan also. And so with that clarity, and a clear message, it can feel like you're just staring at a blank page, right? wondering what you're supposed to do, right? Wondering, okay, what am I going to put on my pages of my website? What do I need to share? And so then the last thing is thinking your website has to be complicated. And so that's the, that last reason there. You start thinking that you need all these pages, like, everybody else, a complicated funnel, lots of tech tools, but really, you know, it can be, only need a simple, clear website, you know, especially when it comes to pages, your home, about, a service page, a contact page. And then, some people have a blog page if you want to have that to share, like, your tips that are going to connect with your ideal clients. But those are, simple, it's clear. And even with the names, making it simple, homepage, about me, about us, especially if you work, it's not just you, your services or how to work with me, making it simple and making it clear. It comes down to that. You want it simple and you want it clear and straight to the point. So people, your ideal clients, when they come, they're going to understand. They're going to know, okay, this is where I go to find out how they can help me. This is how I can find out more about them. This is how I can contact them and reach out to them. We want it simple and so they understand. And because thinking about it, it only takes 2 to 3 seconds for someone to decide when they come to your website if they're going to stay. And so those are the things there. So if you are ever looking, thinking about it, you're thinking about creating your website and you get that overwhelming feeling, it usually comes back to one of these three things. Too many decisions being presented at once, trying to build a website before you even figured out what your message is that you want to share, or thinking your website needs to be this complicated, you know, website when it actually doesn't need to be. And so once you start focusing on the right pieces first, the whole process, it becomes simpler and it makes more sense, and then you're able to focus more. And so this is actually um, one of the reasons that I created something, and it's the website readiness audit. And so before I share a little bit more of that, if you're just joining, if you're coming in, you're watching the replay, post your questions in the comments and I'll be able to answer those also. And also, and back to the website readiness audit, um, because, I created it because sometimes, if you're thinking about creating a website, and even if you already, you have a website, but it hasn't been touched in, like, it's been years and you've been trying to update it, but you're not even sure where do you begin with that. This is, it's really you need that clarity, right? Like I mentioned before, clarity around your website, it needs to, it's going to help you to really understand and to see, to look at that bigger picture of your website, especially if you already have it, and to understand, okay, this is where I need to work on. And so inside the readiness audit, we take a look at things like that, the message on your website, the structure, of pages, whether your website supports the business you're building. And so you can move forward with a clear plan. And even if you don't have a website yet, the readiness audit is still for you also, because it helps you to figure out, we can decide, like, okay, this is what you need, getting those beginning steps and figure out, okay, this is where the clarity I need to focus on, what I need, what I want them to get when they come to my page, and who my ideal clients are. And so this is something that you're looking for. You want something that with a new pair of eyes on your website, or a new pair of eyes of helping you to figure out where you need to, the direction your website needs to take. Comment readiness in the comments, and I'll get you the link and you can book that readiness audit. And like I said, so those things that we covered in year that I covered. So once again, we get kind of distracted. It's, too many decisions all at once. We need to focus the clarity first, right? We need to decide who are you helping, what problems do you solve, and how someone can work with you. The next thing, trying to build a website before the message isn't clear, before you have that clarity. And so we need to focus, clear the message, three simple questions for our visitors that, that we need to answer on our website. Who is this for? What problem does the person solve? And how can I work with them? And then the last thing is, thinking your website has to be complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. We need to make it clear and make it simple. A home page, about page, services page, and a contact page. And so it's that simple and that focused. And so those three different things. And so once we have that, we can, that foundation, that's where we need to begin. So think of it that way, building that foundation with clarity. So if you have questions, post them in the comments, and I will see you next week.